Hi everyone, welcome to our Wednesday webinar on the 22nd of August. My name's Rebecca and today we're going to be looking at assessment and differentiation using Smart Learning Suite. I am a little bit about me. I'm a Stage 3 teacher at Curl North Public School in New South Wales. We're quite a big school down on the coast on the Lynn Beaches near Manly, and I'm the relieving assistant principal at the moment working on a 5-6 composite. My relationship with Smart began a few years ago when I came to this school. I've been using Smart products prior to that, but that's when I became more involved with Smart, and I've absolutely loved using Smart products throughout my teaching career, and I just think it can really improve learning for students. I've just recently completed my Smart Certified Trainer training, and hence I'm here with you today to talk about assessment and differentiation. So to get started, what we're going to cover in this session, we're going to look at some of the options that we can use within Smart Lab and Smart Response for assessment. So we're going to have a look at some assessment options where we're looking at assessment of prior learning, assessment in order to enable differentiation, and also summative assessment. We're also going to look at some of the tools in Smart Notebook and Smart Lab, which allow us to differentiate lessons once we've assessed and we know where our learners are at. And then finally, I'm just going to take you through a real life example of one of my Stage 3 maths lessons on order of operations. So first of all, looking at assessment. So when we think about assessing prior knowledge, there are a number of different things. In fact, when I was putting this together, there were so many things that came to mind of different ways in which I use Smart Learning Suite to help me to assess the prior knowledge of my students. So I'm just going to take you through a few, and I've tried to provide some examples from some different KLAs as well, just so that you can get an idea of how versatile these tools are. So first of all, we're going to have a look at how we can just use the Shout It Out tool for brainstorming, and then looking at the Shout It Out tool, but being a little bit more specific, so we can create KWL charts, we can do things like 2 stars and a wish, that sort of thing. Makes life a lot easier in terms of gathering that data from our students. Looking at a way of using the super sort to look at content-specific vocabulary and helping to assess whether or not students already have that vocabulary. And then finally, an idea that I use where I get the students to actually generate I wonder statements at the beginning of a unit and try and get them thinking about what it is that they'd really like to learn about moving forward in the unit, and tap into some of their prior knowledge and just use the Smart Notebook tool, click and reveal. So, first of all, here's an example of a Shout It Out. So I might show this to my students. So at the moment in history, we're looking at human rights throughout the 20th century, and part of that we're looking at suffragettes. And so obviously this is a primary source that is an image of a suffragette, but at the beginning of the unit, using this just to display to the students and getting them to think, well, what do you actually think is going on in this photograph? What is it about? And what do you wonder about this? So I'd probably display this and give them some thinking time, but then I would throw it out to them with a Shout It Out so that they could respond, and their responses can come up onto the board to share with everybody. So I'm just going to take you through how I'd actually go about doing that. So I'll show you on this next page. So if I've got this title, what do you wonder about photograph? I then go up to our Smart Lab at the top here, click on that, and we get our options for Smart Lab. Sorry, my computer's a little bit slow. There it is. And we've got all the different options within Smart Lab, and I'd move it down so that I could find the Shout It Out. I love the Shout It Out tool. I just find it really versatile. You can use it in so many different ways. So clicking on that Shout It Out, for this one I would just have randomized, because I just want them to think about what do they actually wonder about this photograph? What do they notice? What can they see? What questions is it making them think about? I can determine how many responses I want students to have, and I can decide whether I want their names to be shown or not. In this case, I'm going to leave those settings as it is. Hit finish. And then we get this screen loading for this shout it out. And what will happen is there's my activity there. You can see I'm logged into this activity, and so is Helen. And if I click on this, this just is my code. So my students would go to hellosmart.com. They'd put in my class code 53436, and that would then allow them to connect to this shout it out. And when I hit the start button, they would then be able to post their ideas about the photograph. So any of the students who are connected, they can then say, oh, you know, I think this photograph is about a lady who is protesting about something, or I wonder what a suffragette is. It's in black and white. Thank you, Helen. And within that, then I can get a lot of different ideas showing up on the screen, and the students can see that in real time. So they're throwing those ideas up there. And so often somebody else's response then helps generate another question for that student. So for example, I might see, oh, it's in black and white, and somebody else might think, oh, maybe this was something that happened a long time ago before we had colour photographs, and then somebody said she looks so sad. That might stimulate some other thoughts. So it just really enables that sort of collaborative approach to what do you think this is about, as opposed to just children jotting it down themselves, or more traditionally putting their hand up and sort of one by one calling out what they think, and the teacher having to record that on the board in some way. So that's a really useful tool. Within Shout It Out as well, I can also just click this star button, and sometimes what I do is I add a timer to the Shout It Out. So I just want a really quick snapshot of their first idea that comes to their mind when they see that picture, and then consequently then they've only got a limited amount of time, and so I can just click on that to add a timer. Press play, obviously, then it's going to give a 1 minute timer. And once I'm finished, I can just click end, and they're on their screens, that disappears. So I find that to be a really useful tool of just generating those ideas at the beginning of a unit. Similarly, you can use the exact same tool to create a KWL chart by using the categories. So in terms of how we do that, it's exactly the same as the process that we just went through. So going up to our Smart Lab, choosing our Shout It Out. But this time when we go into our Shout It Out, we would choose to create some categories. So choosing our Shout It Out, but this time instead of randomized, I'd actually want the students to have different categories that they can record their ideas under. So for example, with a KWL, I would do my no, wonder and learned, and then I can decide how many contributions I want my students to have. Again, if I wanted to do this as sort of a peer assessment idea, I could do 2 stars and a wish here, so star, star, wish. I find that's quite useful when you're doing things like, I know one thing that I always find useful is when we're listening to public speaking presentations, and the students are always, they listen to the presentation and then I try and get some peer feedback from them, but it's so tricky because they all want to tell us what they thought their friend did well, or what suggestion they would have for them to improve. And of course, just through time, you don't get a chance to get round to all of those students. And so consequently, having a tool where they can actually just throw their ideas using their device up onto the board and they can all be there. It's immediate feedback for the student who's speaking, but also allows all of the students to be able to be active in that process. So once again, exactly the same. The students join with the code, they can hit start, the teacher hits start, and then this time they can actually add in their ideas into the appropriate category. So that is quite useful. Okay, so the next thing that I often like to do is to use the super sort to consider content-specific vocabulary. I find this is quite a useful tool just in terms of, I guess it's activating prior knowledge as much as assessing prior knowledge, and just sort of saying, well, okay, this is the vocabulary that the students are going to need in order to access this content. Who already has some idea about this vocabulary, who doesn't? And I find with the super sort, it works with just about anything that you can think of where you can split into two different categories or sort in some way, it will work. So there's some suggestions there of 2D shapes versus 3D objects, so which are shapes and which objects, nouns or verbs. In science, maybe living or non-living. We've been looking at physical change or chemical change. In maths, prime numbers, composite numbers. Really, the opportunities are endless here. Anything that you can sort, you can use this tool. So here's an example of a super sort. Just loading. Here it comes. So this one was the first example. So 2D shapes versus 3D objects. So I've entered, when I set this up, I entered in a whole range of different options for the students. They can then look at this. They can drag their selected object or shape into the appropriate spaceship, and they get that immediate feedback. So if it settles there, then yes, it's correct. If they try and put it in the wrong spot, then it will just jump back down and we get the little spaceship doing a bit of a shake just to indicate that, oh no, try again. And so obviously that's a 3D object. Now, in terms of this, you can push this using Smart Learning Suite online. You can actually push out this device to students so it becomes an independent activity for them. That if you're unsure of how to do that, there was a great webinar by Beck will know last week on using workspaces and how to make pages independent activities or collaborative activities for students. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that if you're interested in doing that. Something else, I mean, often this is just an activity where it might just be on the smart board at the front of the room and you're just getting students to, which things do you recognise there? Which shapes or objects do you recognise? Do you know, is it a shape? Is it an object? What's the difference? What makes it 2D? What makes it 3D? And it generates that discussion with the students. Very easy again to set up, so I'll just take you through that quickly now. So again, just up in the Smart Lab, but this time you'd be looking for the super sort. Just to save time, I'm just going to jump into the editing mode here. So within the super sort, this is the interface that you get when you open your super sort. So you can obviously label your two categories and you can add either text or images into these categories. You put them in where they're supposed to go, and the program will automatically jumble that up for you once you've done it. So obviously I could add in another shape there or another object over this side. I could also do images. To do an image, I would just select on that image and it opens up my my hard drive and I can search for an image that I've got on my computer to add in. I've also then got the option of choosing a theme. So obviously you saw before that I had the spaceship theme, but there are all the different things you can choose from. And also if you don't want a theme, you can just go simple and have, if you feel the theme might be a distraction, you can go to that simple option as well. And then they can sort in that way. And I find that this is the great tool initially, but then also what I've done with my students is I get them to create games like this. So I say, well, we're going to do a super sort and I'd like you to sort these things into, I want you to come up with what we could sort into two categories. So I might give them the categories, but not give them any of the options from the bottom. And they have to come up with what would go down there, and then they create them as a group perhaps, and then we test another group on that super sort. So that really means that we end up with being able to use this as a tool for assessing prior knowledge, as a formative tool, and also if we wanted to as a summative tool in terms of what they can actually create, how well do they understand the content in order to be able to create something using this tool. So another example for assessment that I like, and it's been around for ages, this has been in a Smart Notebook for as long as I can remember, it's just using the shapes to click on to create shapes, and then by animating those shapes so that when you click on them that they fade. I find that this is a really engaging way for the students to get started into a new topic or a new content. So for example, if I just come in here and I would choose students to come and click on, and as we reveal different parts of this image that's underneath, they start to wonder what it is. So for this one, we thought initially maybe it was an animal, maybe it was fur, what's happening there? Okay, we're not really too sure. And as we reveal it, we get to the point where we realize, okay, this is actually mold. And it's quite a close-up of mold. And this was an introduction to a microorganisms unit, but it was a really great way to generate a discussion about, well, what mold actually is, and the fact that it grows. What does it look like when it is growing, and if we do a close-up. So a great way again to just stimulate, to activate that prior knowledge with students and to get an idea of what they know. You could most definitely combine this with shout it out, for example. So do the click and reveal, and then on the next slide have a shout it out where they could then throw up their ideas about what they think. Or you could also combine it with a smart response where you actually then give them some questions and see what they know about mold. And I'm about to show you the smart response. Just before I do though, in terms of this click and reveal, it's quite simple. So I've just created shapes using my tools up here. So I've gone to my shape tool to create these squares. And once I've got that tool there, once I've selected it and it's got this sort of dot outline around it, it's selected, I can then go over to these tools over here and object animation. And once I'm in object animation, then I can select that I want this to fade out and I want that to happen when it's clicked. I only want it to happen once, so I don't need it to repeat, and just normal speed. So there are different things I can do here with animating. I could make all the boxes fly away if I want to, but any of those sort of things, it's very quick and easy to create, but it can be a really engaging way to start a unit or start a lesson. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is actually to use the Smart Response tool. So the Smart Response tool is Smart Learning Suite's built-in assessment tool, and it's really, really versatile. It can be used in a lot of ways. If you have a look up here, it's this little tick symbol at the top on your Smart notebook software. So when you click that tick, that takes you into Smart Response, and you have options then to create quizzes, questions around these different options. So you can do true and false questions, you do multiple choice, you could do polls and opinions, you could do short answer, or you can even do multiple choice questions where there's more than one correct answer, so multiple answers. So I'm just going to quickly show you how you go into that and what that looks like when you're setting that up. It's quite simple. So you go up to your Smart Response tab, the little tick at the top. This then comes up. We've got these options. Now, the great thing about this too is that you don't have to say, oh, well, I'm going to create a quiz and it all has to be multiple choice or it all has to be true and false. It's actually by question. So I might decide that my first question is going to be a true or false question. I can enter my question here. If I need an image to go in there, I can drag an image into there, or I can browse for one in the same way as we did in the super sort. So I might say today is Wednesday. And if that's my question, obviously I want to know whether that's true or false. It's true, assuming we're doing it today. And then I can go on to my next question. So go on to add a question, then question 2. Up here, I can toggle. So if I decide, you know what, my next question is going to be a short answer question, and I'm going to get the students to respond in that way, then that's fine. I can choose that and adjust it to my needs. And I can keep adding questions that way. And once I'm done, I hit next. It gives me a little chance to review. I can add a title. I can give instructions so that when the students log into this, they can get some instructions about what's happening. If I decide, you know what, this question's too hard, I can get rid of it. And then once I've finished it, then that then creates within that page. So once again, in terms of the students then accessing this content, it's exactly the same as the way that they accessed the Smart Lab activities before. So they would log into my classroom, so go to hellosmart.com and they type in my class code, which is again 53436, and once they're connected to that, and I can see their names popping up here as they are joining, then when we're ready, then I would obviously be able to start that this is just telling me that I've still got shouted out running from before, so obviously that will stop when I start this new activity. So then I sort of get a running percentage of, you know, how many questions have been answered. It gives me an idea of how we're going in terms of who's answered. The reason that's only going to 67% is because I'm talking to you and not answering my question. But I can also jump in here to show questions. I can say, oh, okay, so question 1 was this. I can get an idea, and then I can jump back to my overview to see how we're going in terms of how many people have completed. And once I'm done, then I can obviously just hit end again. I then get a little summary of the results, and what I love about this tool is that you can then export the results. So quite often I will use this, and I'll show you in my lesson example coming up how I use this to help me to group students in order for differentiation, and it just exports into a spreadsheet. It's really handy. It means that I can just automatically see their responses, and it at a glance very easily drop kids into different groups in order to provide them with differentiated instruction. So I'm going to jump down now to, this is the example of my lesson that, as I said before, stage 3, multiplication and division. I've got the New South Wales codes there, but I also put in the ACARA codes too, because I know that New South Wales think they're special, and so we have different things, but we are still doing the Australian curriculum. So both those codes are there. So we're looking at order of operations. And this is my notebook that I would use. So it's got sort of an idea where I can embed everything within this notebook, and then I can work through that. And as I said before, I can push this out to students using Smart Learning Suite online as well. So then they can actually be navigating through these slides, and they can be working independently at various points. So we're looking at why it's important to have a set of a set order. Sorry about that. For order of operations. So I start with a shout it out, and this is really tapping into their understanding of the word operations, because obviously that's critical vocabulary to understand order of operations. So using a shout it out to do that. From there, I go in and I usually try and have some sort of hook activity. It's not always, sometimes I use the click and reveal as the hook. In this case, it was just a quick YouTube video that looked at the order of operations. Another great tool that you can use in Notebook now is to be able to embed YouTube videos directly from Notebook. So to do that, just clicking over onto the left and finding the YouTube button, and then you can search directly within Notebook for a YouTube clip to add into your notebook. I find that really, really handy. So moving on from there, so this is just using some of these, some of the tools within Notebook. So looking at, well, what are the order of operations, and click to reveal. So what do each of these things stand for, etc. This is just using the dice tool. So I just searched for an interactive dice, and I added the content to it. So when you add a dice like this, you can create a custom dice as well as a traditional dice. And so what I did was I created a custom dice, and I put different questions onto it so that I could get the students to be thinking about, well, if they roll this dice, what operation do they think they should be done first? They can refer to the order of operations here, and we can be talking about, well, okay, why is it that we do multiplication first rather than subtraction in this activity? And just adding that dice into it, it's that element of chance, and it's engaging for the students, and you don't know what's coming. Okay, so then moving into the modelled part of my lesson, I would be obviously modelling how we use the order of operations in order to solve these things. Again, I've just put in some click and reveals to look at the different steps. But then actually, once I'd done this lesson, then I had a suggestion from a colleague, and she said, oh, why don't you use a sort to do that? And I thought, yeah, that's actually a really great idea. So I created a sort as well. I didn't actually do this in my lesson, but I added it in later because I thought, you know what, next time I do this could be a really good idea. So instead of just having click and reveal, using, this is actually the ranking tool. I put the question at the top and just saying to them, okay, well, looking at this question, what would I do first? Would I do the 18 minus 11? Would I do the plus 5? Would I do the times 2? And they need to drag those things across into the steps. And once again, immediate feedback to tell you, the basketball gets the shot, the basketballer gets the shot when you get it correct. So that's another way to sort of create that engagement, I suppose. Through this guided part, we still do some, sorry, I'm getting a bit tongue-tied. Still do some paper and pencil stuff. So the kids will still work. They might work on whiteboards. If they're on devices, they might work on this actual page within the notebook and take a screenshot of it, post it to Seesaw, that sort of thing, as they're working through their practice. And then what I do from that point is I embed a smart response activity partway through. So the idea of this is I've sort of done the instruction at the beginning. I'm now at the stage of, okay, I want the kids to break off into activities, but I really need to see who's understood what at this point. And so I've created a little quiz. It's just got 10 questions. And then as they go through, some of them are just straight algorithms like that. Some of them are saying, well, which part of this would you do first, etc. There's more complex and simple so that I can get an idea of who's sitting where in my groups. So I then use my groups. Here they are. I can move the kids around according to what my spreadsheet says. I usually get them to do another activity. In this particular case, they were doing a problem-solving activity where they were matching the order of operations expression to a problem-solving expression, like a word problem. And while they did that, I was able to just quickly look at the results and move the kids into the appropriate groups. What I've done down here is each of these circles I've just linked to another page in the notebook. So when you click, if you're in the circles, if you click on the circle, this has actually, I've used the link tool here, sorry. And I've linked it to another page in my notebook, so another page in this file, and that's going to be the activity that the circles will do. So in this case, I use some of the Smart Lab activities to provide some options for what would happen. So the circles were the circle group, we're doing a task. Here it comes slowly. Where they were actually deciding whether or not an expression actually needed parentheses or didn't, based on the order of operations. Then I had another group who were actually using the smart recorder. And oh, look, my arrow's not pointing to the right spot. It used to be, but I've moved things around in my toolbar. This is our smart recorder up here. And so what they were doing is looking at this expression in a small group. So this group was working with me. And then they were actually then annotating on the board what they thought was going on with this error that this student had made and why they'd made that error. So they're just pressing the smart recorder tool and pressing record, and then once that's recorded, then anything that they're writing on here and annotating would then be recorded. Sorry, I'm doing this with my mouse, so it's not great writing. So they might be saying, oh, this part equals 40, and so these people have done, this student's done this first, and they should have actually done the multiplication first. When they're finished and they press stop, we just straight away get an option to export that. So I get the kids to just call the file name their name and order of operations. They know where to save it, and then we've got that record of their thinking. So that's how we would use the smart recorder as part of a group activity. And I often do that with the group working with me, because we'll be working in a small group and doing some explicit learning, and it's good for me to be able to track their thinking, and they enjoy doing it. The last group was doing a game show, which again is in Smart Lab, and they love doing the game show. So they work in pairs often and on their own devices and spin the wheel, and I've just entered in different questions in there. So in this case, this is still around order. So for those students who are still not sure which things to do first, this is actually consolidating for them. Okay, well, let's look back at our order of operations, and they have a little order of operations chart that they refer to help them to answer this, and they can just select the answer. If they get it right, then it tells them that right, obviously that's wrong. Then it will say, well, let's give the other team a go, etc. So at the end of my lesson, I do like to have some sort of reflection for the kids, particularly in maths, just to consider, well, okay, we set out with our intention was to to work out why we have to have this set order of operations. So I like finishing off with a shouted out or a smart response, a short answer question that's like an exit ticket, and I just get them to explain, well, okay, this is what we've learned, so why is it important? What have you learned about that throughout this lesson? And that's then a really good tool for me to see where we need to head in the following lesson. So that's it from me. I'll just jump over to questions. If you did have a question, you can pop them into the section on the question section, and I will do my best to answer them. Have we got any questions at this stage? So no questions at this stage. If you do have a question, just pop it into that question box. I will endeavour to answer it. Okay, oh, well, that's good news. Hopefully it all made sense to you. Well, look, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I know we had people from all over the country today, so that was very exciting for me. I hope that you find these tools as useful as I do, and I definitely encourage you to just have a play around with them. Obviously, the first time you do anything can be a bit daunting, but once you get used to it, you will learn to love them, as I have, and I'm sure your students will love them as well. So thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us again in the future for another Wednesday webinar. Thanks, bye.